My story takes place in the quiet suburbs of a bustling city, where I live alone in a house that feels a little too big now that my son, Jack, has moved out. For most of my life, I worked as a translator, a job I loved, a job that taught me how much power words truly hold. That's a lesson I was about to learn all over again, in the most painful way possible. This is the story of how my son's fiancée, a woman who seemed to have it all, revealed her true, cruel nature at a simple family dinner, and how the one skill she thought was my weakness became her ultimate undoing. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It was supposed to be a nice evening. Jack had invited me to a small restaurant to meet his fiancée, Charlotte, and her mother, Victoria, for the first time since they got engaged. My first meeting with Charlotte had been brief and cordial, but I'd sensed a certain aloofness about her. A lawyer, Jack had told me. A corporate lawyer. The kind of person who could charm a room and then dissect you for sport. I told myself it was just nerves. I wanted to like her for Jack's sake. He'd been so happy since they met. The restaurant was one of those trendy spots, all minimalist decor and soft lighting. Jack was excited, fussing with his tie as we waited. When Charlotte and Victoria arrived, they looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, Charlotte in a sleek black dress, Victoria in a perfectly tailored pantsuit. They were both beautiful, and they carried themselves with an air of effortless superiority. The initial conversation was pleasant enough, if a little strained. Charlotte asked about my life, my retirement, and my time as a translator. She seemed genuinely interested, or at least she played the part well. I told her about my passion for historical texts and the challenges of translating ancient languages. Her mother, Victoria, a high-end art dealer, offered a few polite but dismissive comments about the practicality of such pursuits. It was clear she saw my career as a quaint hobby, not a serious profession. Jack, bless his heart, tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground, but the tension was already there, a silent hum just below the surface. As the evening wore on, the alcohol flowed, and with it, the careful politeness began to crack. Charlotte leaned in and began to whisper to her mother in rapid, fluid French. I'd grown up speaking the language, a legacy from my grandmother who was from Montreal, and I'd perfected it during my years as a translator, living in Paris for a decade in my 20s. I had a command of the language far beyond the phrases you pick up on vacation. But I said nothing. I just smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, pretending to be fully engaged in the small talk. The first comment that pricked me was Charlotte gesturing to my simple silver necklace. I'd worn it because Jack gave it to me for my 50th birthday. Elle a un gars si simple. Vraiment date. Comme ses histoires sur les vieux papiers, she whispered to her mother. She has such simple taste. Truly dated. Like her stories about old papers. I felt a jolt of anger, but I held my composure. Jack was oblivious, laughing at a joke his fiancée had just told him in English. It was a joke about a lawyer who had to deal with a difficult client, but the punchline was something about how easy it was to manipulate people who lived in their own little bubbles. I knew what she was doing. I kept a pleasant expression on my face, but internally, I was reeling. Was she doing this to me on purpose? Was she testing me? Or was she just so arrogant and careless that she didn't think I would understand? The thought that my own son's future wife could be this cruel, this casually dismissive, was heartbreaking. Jack had always been so thoughtful, so kind. How could he have fallen for someone so different from him? The dinner continued, and with each passing minute, Charlotte's whispered comments became more frequent and more brazen. They were like tiny, poisonous darts aimed directly at my self-worth. I listened, my heart sinking with each word. I wanted to stand up, to confront her, to scream at her to stop, but I knew that would only make me look like the bad guy. The fragile piece of the dinner table was holding by a thread, and I was holding it together. Jack was happy, and that was all that mattered. For now. I just smiled, took another sip of my wine, and listened to the poison. The evening was a slow, agonizing descent into a masterclass of casual cruelty. After the initial jab about my necklace, Charlotte seemed to gain confidence. Her whispers to Victoria became a constant background hum, a second, far more vicious conversation running parallel to our polite English chatter. She would ask me a question in English, with a smile that never reached her eyes, and as I answered, she would turn to her mother and offer a scathing critique of my response in French. I felt like I was in a play where I was the only actor who knew the real script. Jack was an innocent bystander, caught in the middle of a conflict he didn't even know existed. At one point, I was talking about my travels to France for my work, and how much I loved the markets in Provence. I described the vibrancy, the smells, the sounds. I watched Charlotte's face carefully. Her smile was a little too wide. She waited until I finished, and as Jack was complimenting my story, she leaned into her mother. Elle a de rêves si petit, n'est-ce pas? Passer ses journées à rêver de marches. Tellement banal. She has such small dreams, doesn't she? Spending her days dreaming of markets. So banal. The word banal hit me like a physical blow. It was the perfect word, meant to minimize my entire existence. I saw Victoria smirk in response, a flash of shared condescension passing between them. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just a simple insult. It was a judgment of my life, my passions, everything I had worked for and enjoyed. The worst part was how they were doing it right in front of my son, her future husband, the man who was supposed to love and respect me. He saw none of it. He was too busy being in love to notice the quiet poison being poured into our conversation. They moved on to talking about their own lives, their high-powered careers, their upcoming wedding plans. Charlotte, in her perfect English, talked about the venue they were considering, a lavish estate in the countryside. She mentioned the guest list, the food, the flowers. She was radiant, and Jack was looking at her like she was the most wonderful person on earth. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I wanted so desperately to be happy for him. To be happy for them both. But the trust was already gone. During a lull in the conversation, Jack got up to use the restroom. The moment he was gone, the facade of politeness vanished completely. Victoria leaned forward, her face a mask of casual disdain. Alors, Olivia, Illinois est clair que vous n'avez pas beaucoup d'expérience avec les femmes comme nous. C'est un monde différent. Une autre classe, si vous voulez. So, Olivia, it's clear you don't have much experience with women like us. It's a different world. A different class, if you will. It was a blatant power play. They were sizing me up, deciding where I fit in their world, and finding me wanting. I sat there, my mind racing, trying to decide what to do. I could call them out on their behavior, but that would create a scene, embarrass Jack, and most likely they would just deny everything. They would pretend they were just speaking in French to each other, a mother-daughter bond. I knew it would be my word against theirs, and they would spin it so I was the crazy, insecure mother-in-law. Instead, I just smiled, a little too brightly, and said, C'est très gentil de votre part de partager avec moi. That's very kind of you to share with me. I saw their eyes widen, just for a second. The tiniest flicker of surprise. It was just a simple, polite phrase, but it was enough. It was enough for them to know that I understood everything. The smirk on Charlotte's face faltered for a moment, and Victoria's perfect posture shifted ever so slightly. They said nothing more in French for the rest of the evening. The silence was more deafening than their insults. I had won a small battle, but I knew the war was just beginning. The following weeks were a slow, simmering torment. I couldn't stop thinking about what they had said. The words replayed in my mind like a broken record, each one a fresh stab to the heart. Dated taste. Small dreams. Banal. I couldn't shake the feeling of being judged and dismissed by a woman who was about to become family. The pain wasn't just in the words themselves, but in the casual cruelty with which they were delivered, in the shared laughter of a mother and daughter who found my life so amusing. Jack was blissfully unaware. He would call me, excited about their wedding plans. "Mom, Charlotte found the most amazing caterer. You're going to love the food." Or, "We're thinking of an outdoor ceremony. It's going to be so beautiful." Each conversation was a reminder of the two-faced nature of his fiancée. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to explain that she wasn't the sweet, thoughtful person he thought she was, but I knew it would just sound like jealousy. It would sound like the typical mother-in-law drama. He would never believe that a woman who seemed so perfect could be so cruel behind his back. I started to withdraw. I told my friends I was busy. I stopped taking their calls. My best friend, Sarah, finally showed up at my door unannounced. She was an entrepreneur, a force of nature who didn't take no for an answer. She saw the pain on my face immediately. She sat down, poured us both a cup of tea, and just waited for me to talk. "Olivia, what's going on?" she asked softly. "You've been avoiding me." "It's not like you." The dam broke. I told her everything. The dinner, the whispering, the words in French that I understood perfectly. I told her about the way Charlotte and her mother, Victoria, had mocked my life, my career, my simple tastes. I told her about the look on their faces when they realized I had understood. Sarah listened patiently, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, a fury building in her eyes. That's horrible," she finally said. "That's not just rude, Olivia. That's a calculated form of psychological abuse. They were trying to belittle you, to put you in your place before you even had a chance to become a family." She was right. The words weren't just insults. They were a warning. A declaration of war. They were meant to make me feel small, to make me doubt myself, to make me believe I was not worthy of their world, and therefore, not worthy of my own son. "I don't know what to do, Sarah," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell Jack. He would never believe me. He's so in love with her. He sees her as perfect." "Then you don't tell him," Sarah said, her voice firm. "You show him. You can't fight an open battle with people like that. They're too good at manipulating the narrative. You have to fight a different kind of war. A quiet one. One they don't even see coming." The word war hung in the air between us. It felt too big, too dramatic. But as I thought about it, I realized it was the perfect description of what they had started. They had attacked me, on my own turf, in the language of my own past. They had used my life as a punchline. I wasn't just going to sit there and take it. I had to do something. For myself. For my son. For the integrity of our family. The insults may have been haunting me, but I knew that I had to turn that pain into a plan. The seed of revenge was planted, and with Sarah's help, it began to grow. We agreed that confronting Charlotte directly was pointless. She would deny everything, and Jack would be caught in the middle. We had to prove her true nature, not just to me, but to my son. And the proof had to be irrefutable. We needed something more than my word against hers. We needed hard evidence. My first step was a deep dive into Charlotte's social media. She had a perfectly curated online presence, professional photos, smiling selfies with Jack, posts about charity work and social justice issues. It was a beautiful lie. I knew, from my years of translating, that a text could have a subtext, a hidden meaning. And I was determined to find it. I started with her professional life. I searched for articles, interviews, anything I could find on her and her mother, Victoria. Charlotte's legal firm had a glossy website, and her biography was impressive. It listed her as a specialist in corporate mergers and acquisitions, with a long list of successful cases. It all seemed legitimate. But as I dug deeper, I found something interesting. A local newspaper article from a few years ago mentioned a lawsuit against a tech startup. The article didn't name names, but it described a complicated legal battle where a major corporation was accused of stealing intellectual property. The corporation was represented by Charlotte's firm. The case was settled out of court, and no details were ever released. It was a small detail, but it nagged at me. It felt like a loose thread waiting to be pulled. My second line of inquiry was the language itself. Charlotte and Victoria had used specific, snide phrases in French. They weren't just common sayings. They were the kind of things that revealed a certain worldview. Tellement banal, un autre classe, and the comment about my dated taste. I started to research the origins of these phrases, their use in contemporary French culture, and their social context. I found that they were often used in a very specific, upper-class Parisian dialect to signal social superiority and disdain for the uninitiated. It wasn't just a language, it was a weapon. A weapon they thought I didn't understand. I created a fake social media profile, with a generic name and a profile picture I generated with an AI tool, a middle-aged woman with a vague, pleasant expression. I started following Charlotte and Victoria, and their circles. I learned about their daily lives, their friends, the restaurants they frequented, and the parties they attended. I paid close attention to their photo captions and comments, looking for any other coded language or veiled insults. I found nothing that directly related to me, but I did find a pattern of behavior. They were constantly surrounded by people who were, for lack of a better word, useful. Business partners, powerful clients, socialites with connections. I realized that to them, relationships were transactional. Jack, my kind-hearted, naive son, was a valuable asset in their world. He was a brilliant data analyst, and his firm was a well-respected tech company. They weren't just marrying him for love, they were marrying him for what he could bring to the table. The final piece of my investigation was the wedding itself. I started looking at the wedding planning documents they had shared with me, the venue they had chosen, the vendors, the guest list. I cross-referenced the names on the guest list with Charlotte's social media and her professional connections. I found that a significant portion of the guests were either clients, potential clients, or powerful figures in the legal and financial worlds. It was more than a wedding, it was a networking event disguised as a celebration of love. The realization was sickening. The pieces were all coming together, a perfect, ugly picture of a woman and her mother who saw life as a game, and people as pawns. The investigation was over. It was time to start planning my move. The investigation had given me all the information I needed. I had the motive, I had the evidence, and now, with Sarah's help, I had a plan. The goal was simple: expose Charlotte's true character without making it look like I was just a jealous mother. We had to use her own arrogance against her. We had to give her the stage to reveal herself. The wedding rehearsal dinner was the perfect opportunity. It would be a smaller, more intimate gathering than the wedding itself, with a limited number of guests, close family and friends from both sides. Jack would be there, as would Charlotte's parents. It was the last chance to show Jack the truth before he committed to a life with a woman who had no respect for him or his family. Our plan was based on two things: my knowledge of French and Charlotte's ego. I had been following Charlotte's social media and knew that she was an avid practitioner of yoga and meditation. She often posted quotes from Buddhist texts, often in French. It was an element of her perfect, spiritual persona. It was also the key to my plan. Over the next few weeks, I spent hours crafting a speech. It had to be perfect. It had to seem heartfelt, emotional, and loving, but it had to contain a secret message, a time bomb that only Charlotte and her mother would understand. I wrote about my love for Jack, my hopes for his happiness, and my excitement to welcome Charlotte into the family. I practiced it over and over, refining every word, every pause. The core of the speech was a series of phrases that, on their own, seemed innocent, but when strung together and delivered in a certain context, were a direct, devastating response to everything they had said about me. I also reached out to an old colleague from my translating days, a woman named Leah who was now a professor of linguistics at a prestigious university. I explained my predicament to her, and she was appalled. I asked her for help in crafting the perfect final insult, one that would be subtle enough to go over the heads of most of the guests, but would land like a nuclear bomb for Charlotte and Victoria. Leah suggested a single phrase, one that was a popular modern French idiom, a clever jab at someone who presents themselves as a certain kind of person but is secretly the opposite. The phrase was the joli vernis, meaning a pretty veneer or a pretty polish. I loved it. It was elegant, subtle, and incredibly damning. The day of the rehearsal dinner arrived. I was a bundle of nerves. Sarah came over to help me get ready. She gave me a hug. "You've got this, Olivia. Remember, you're not the crazy mother-in-law. You are the truth. The truth always wins." Her words helped calm me down. I put on a simple but elegant dress, a dress that I knew Charlotte would consider dated and banal, and I put on the necklace Jack had given me. It was a silent statement. I was not changing for them. I was being myself, and that was enough. As I walked into the restaurant for the rehearsal dinner, I saw Jack talking to Charlotte. He looked so happy, so oblivious. My heart ached for him. But I knew that what I was about to do was for him, too. He deserved to know the kind of person he was about to marry. The room was buzzing with conversation. I exchanged pleasantries with Charlotte's family, a group of people who looked like they were born in a boardroom. I smiled at Charlotte and her mother. They smiled back, a cold, practiced smile that didn't reach their eyes. They had no idea what was coming. I had the speech memorized. My hand shook as I held the note cards I had prepared as a prop. I took a deep breath, found my courage, and waited for my turn to speak. The stage was set. The dinner was a blur of forced smiles and small talk. When it came time for the speeches, my heart was pounding in my chest. Jack went first, giving a heartfelt, simple toast to Charlotte, talking about how she had changed his life for the better. Charlotte's father, a quiet man who seemed to have been swallowed whole by his wife and daughter's personalities, gave a short, anodyne speech about the beauty of love. Then it was my turn. Jack's father, my ex-husband, had long since remarried and was not present, so the honor fell to me. I stood up and cleared my throat. All eyes were on me. I saw Charlotte and Victoria exchange a look. I could almost hear the whispers in their heads. What is she going to say? I hope she doesn't embarrass Jack. I began in English, with a simple, genuine, heartfelt introduction. I remember the day Jack was born. I remember looking at his tiny face and making a promise to him, that I would always, always, put his happiness first. And tonight, as I look at the man he has become, I know that he has found a happiness that I could only have dreamed for him. I paused, letting the emotion settle. Jack smiled at me, a genuine, loving smile that almost made me falter. But I couldn't stop now. Then, I shifted into my French. I had planned this moment carefully. I began by telling a story about my life as a translator. Il est souvent dit que les mots sont la plus grande force de l'univers. It is often said that words are the greatest force in the universe. I saw Charlotte and Victoria stiffen. They were leaning forward, listening intently, an air of amused superiority already on their faces. They thought I was going to give a little, charming speech about my hobbies. I continued, weaving in the subtle jabs. J'ai passé ma vie à comprendre que les mots ont de niveau de sens, un subtexte et une nuance. On peut dire quelque chose et vouloir dire autre chose. I have spent my life understanding that words have levels of meaning, a subtext and a nuance. You can say something and mean something else. I saw Charlotte's perfectly polished composure start to crack. She was blinking, her smile frozen in place. Her mother, Victoria, was staring at me, a cold fury in her eyes. They knew. They knew I was speaking directly to them. I continued my speech, my voice filled with emotion and purpose. I talked about my dreams, about the small joys in my life, about the old papers I used to translate. I used the word banal to describe a simple text, a phrase that would mean nothing to anyone else in the room, but was a direct quote from Charlotte's insult. I spoke about the beauty of something that might seem dated to an outside observer. I repeated a few of their other insults, slightly twisted, and used in a way that seemed to be a compliment to the happiness I had found in my life. I ended my speech with the perfect line, the one that Leah had helped me craft. I looked directly at Charlotte, my gaze unwavering. My voice was quiet, but it carried in the silent room. Etje de cela avec tout l'affection d'une mère, mais j'espère que vous du trouverez en vraie joie, et non seulement le joli vernis que le monde voit. And I say this with all the affection of a mother, but I hope that you too find a real joy, and not just the pretty veneer that the world sees. The words hung in the air. The room was completely silent. Jack looked at me, confused, and then at Charlotte, whose face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She had a perfect command of her emotions, but in this moment, the mask slipped. The anger in her eyes was a raw, ugly thing. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping on the floor, and she said, in French, tu es os. Comment tu es os. You dared. How dare you? Jack, who had been oblivious for the entire evening, looked at her, then back at me. What are you saying, Charlotte? What is going on? Charlotte, unable to control herself, turned on him, her voice dripping with venom. C'est ta mère. Elle se moque de nous. Elle est un folle. It's your mother. She's mocking us. She's crazy. It was the crack I had been waiting for. The truth, in all its ugly glory, had finally been revealed. The room erupted into chaos. Jack, for the first time, saw the woman he was about to marry in a completely different light. He heard the venom in her voice, the pure anger she was directing at me, and he saw the betrayal on her face. Charlotte and Victoria were speaking in frantic, clipped French, their perfect veneers completely shattered. I simply stood there, calm and composed, letting their rage hang in the air for all to see. Jack turned to me, his face pale and confused. Mom, what is she talking about? I looked at him and then back at Charlotte. Jack, I said calmly, in English, your fiancée and her mother have been mocking me in French for months now. They thought I didn't understand. The first time was at dinner when we all met. They called me banal, and said I had small dreams. Tonight, they heard me speak in the very language they thought was their secret weapon, and they couldn't handle it. Charlotte's face twisted with rage. That's a lie. She's making it up. She's jealous, she spat out. But the words were already out. And the silence in the room told me everyone believed me. Sarah, my loyal friend, had a small, satisfied smile on her face. Charlotte's friends, the high-powered lawyers and business people, were watching, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. They were used to seeing people like Charlotte win. They weren't used to seeing them break. Jack didn't know who to believe. But he saw the calm in my face, and he saw the uncontrolled, irrational rage on Charlotte's. He turned to his fiancée. Is this true, Charlotte? Did you say those things? She looked at him, and for a moment, her mask returned, but it was thin and brittle. Jack, it was a joke. A private mother-daughter joke. She's twisting it. No, it wasn't a joke, I said softly. You used your words to make me feel small. You used your language to make me feel less than. And tonight, I used my words to show you that your cruelty would not go unpunished. The fight escalated, with Charlotte yelling, and Jack growing more and more bewildered. Her mother, Victoria, tried to step in, to defend her daughter, but the damage was already done. The room was filled with the ugly truth. The image of the perfect couple, the perfect family, was shattered. Later that night, Jack came to my house. He was devastated. He told me he couldn't believe it. He said he had seen a side of Charlotte he didn't know existed. He had seen her rage, her arrogance, and her absolute lack of remorse. He said he couldn't marry a woman who had so little respect for him or his family. "What am I going to do, Mom?" he asked, his voice raw. "That's your choice, honey," I said, and I meant it. The revenge was not about forcing him to break off the engagement. It was about giving him the truth, so he could make his own decision. I have nothing more to say about it. The choice is yours. The next morning, Jack called me and told me he had broken off the engagement. He couldn't trust her. He couldn't look at her without seeing the ugly, cruel person who had mocked his mother. He told me he was moving back home for a while, to get his head straight. He told me he was sorry. Charlotte and Victoria left town the next day, a flurry of angry phone calls and text messages that Jack simply ignored. The perfect wedding was cancelled. Their friends, the high-powered lawyers and business people, turned their backs on them. They were a liability now, a source of drama and bad press. Their carefully constructed lives, their pretty veneers, were tarnished. Life returned to normal for me. Jack and I grew closer than ever before. He started spending more time with me and my friends, and he realized what it was like to be surrounded by people who loved him for who he was, not for what he could give them. He started dating a woman who was kind and warm, and who treated me with respect. I still think about Charlotte sometimes, and the words she said. But the words no longer hurt. They were just a reminder of a victory. A victory of a different kind. The victory of truth over deception. And for me, that was all the revenge I needed.